Imagine an ordinary night at a small fast food restaurant. Customers laughing, the smell of fried chicken, and employees getting ready to close after a long day. But in a single moment, everything disappears. In less than an hour, 5 people vanished without a trace. No witnesses, no cameras, no evidence. And just 24 hours later, their bodies were found in an abandoned spot far from town. For more than 20 years, one haunting question remained. What really happened inside that restaurant on that night? And how was the mystery finally solved after 2 decades? It was a quiet evening in a small East Texas town called Kilgore, a place with no more than 10 to 14,000 people, where everyone knew everyone. On September 23, 1983, the local Kentucky Fried Chicken was busy as usual. That night was particularly crowded. After a popular football game, fans poured in for a late meal. Inside, 4 employees were working the evening shift. Mary Taylor, the night manager, her 17-year-old daughter Kim, new to the job, Aubrey Opie Hughes, age 39, and Joey Johnson, a 20-year-old student with big dreams and a bright future. At around 10 p.m., Kim finished her shift and went out to meet her friends. But she quickly realized she had forgotten her money. She decided to return to the restaurant and grab it from her mother. When she arrived, she noticed her mother's car still parked outside, which reassured her. But something felt off. The lights were off. The restaurant was eerily quiet. The front door was unlocked, and strangely, the key was still in the lock, as if someone had left in a hurry. Kim stepped inside, still hoping the others were in the kitchen. But then, she saw it. Blood on the floor. Terrified, she ran outside and called her stepfather, Bill, who worked at another branch of the restaurant. When he arrived, he tried to calm her down, suggesting she might have misunderstood. But when they entered through the back door, the truth was unavoidable. The rear doors were wide open. A trash bag was lying outside, something completely unusual since employees never left garbage at the back door. Inside the kitchen, the scene was chaotic. Pots, dishes, cups, and utensils scattered everywhere, as if the place had been violently invaded. Even worse, 2 KFC uniforms were lying abandoned on the floor. Bill and Kim didn't wait to investigate further. They immediately called the police. When officers arrived, the picture became darker. The cash register was completely empty, drawers pulled wide open. On the wall near the counter, investigators found a large hole the size of a human head, indicating that someone had been slammed against it with brutal force. Everything pointed to a violent armed robbery. But the biggest mystery: the employees were gone. Hours later, another twist came. An 18-year-old pregnant woman named Lana showed up at the restaurant searching for her husband, David. He was supposed to stop by the restaurant to return Joey's motorcycle after running errands that day. But he never came home. That's when police realized the truth. The number of missing people wasn't 4. It was 5. And the chilling detail? Lana herself was almost a victim. She had planned to accompany her husband on the motorcycle. But at the last moment, he told her to go home and rest. That simple decision saved her life. Just 24 hours later, the horror was revealed. The 5 missing employees were found dead in an abandoned field outside of town. A crime that took less than an hour to execute, but would take more than 20 years to truly solve. Hours into the investigation, police discovered that 2 of the missing men, David and Joey, were extremely close friends, with no conflicts or issues between them, according to all who knew them. Along with them was a third companion, Monty Linders, 19 years old. The 3 were known to often meet at the KFC restaurant after work, eat together, and then go out for a drive. With this new information, the truth became clear. The number of missing people wasn't 4, but 5. At that moment, investigators realized this was far more than just an armed robbery. It was something darker and more brutal. But the Kilgore Police Department was small, with limited resources and little experience in handling such horrific crimes. Time was slipping away, and pressure was mounting. They had no choice but to call in the Texas Rangers, a specialized unit with expertise in solving such mysteries. When the crime scene was examined, nothing was found. No fingerprints, no hair, no DNA. Nothing. Whoever carried out this massacre knew exactly what they were doing. Gloves, masks, and careful planning ensured that no evidence would be left behind. Then, the next morning, a horrifying discovery was made. A construction worker, on his way to work at the edge of town, noticed what looked like a pile of discarded trash. But as he approached, his blood ran cold. It wasn't trash at all. It was human bodies. Police rushed to the scene, and there they found the 5 missing people. All of them were dead. 4 bodies were lying side by side: David, Joey, Monty, and Mary Taylor. They were face down, their hands folded behind their backs, each executed with a single gunshot to the back of the head. The positioning of their bodies was chilling. None of them had resisted, as if the killers tricked them with a promise of survival, only to deliver a cold execution. The 5th victim, Hughes, was found a short distance away. Evidence revealed he had been assaulted before he was killed. And while all the victims had been shot twice, Joey Johnson had been shot 4 times. This raised disturbing questions. Was Joey the real target? Or were the extra bullets simply the killer's way of making sure he was dead? The medical examiner uncovered one more chilling clue. Beneath Joey's belt, a broken fingernail was discovered. Tests confirmed it belonged to Mary Taylor, the only victim who showed signs of fierce resistance. This clue linked directly to the blood traces and the hole in the wall near the restaurant's counter, suggesting Mary had fought back desperately in those final moments before the nightmare truly began. It was clear that the victim had been attacked that very morning, especially since her nails were freshly cut. But when investigators compared the broken fingernail found caught in the waistband of one of the victim's pants with Mary Taylor's fingers, the results were shocking. There was no match. That meant the nail most likely belonged to the killer, or one of the killers, if more than one person was involved. Detectives were almost certain that a crime like this couldn't have been committed by just one person. Logic suggested at least 2 or 3. Alongside the broken nail, police also discovered a tissue, stained with drops of blood, hidden beneath the restaurant's cash register. But at that moment, it seemed useless to them. A silent witness to the killer's movements inside the crime scene. Then came the investigation's biggest disaster. The police never sealed off the crime scene with yellow tape. The result? Anyone could walk in and out freely, touching and contaminating potential evidence. Crucial traces were destroyed, and irrelevant ones, like strands of hair from an officer or bystanders, were added, clouding the case even further. With the department's weak resources and lack of funding, things went from bad to worse. They didn't even have the budget to professionally develop the crime scene photographs. Instead, they tried to develop them on their own, and the result was catastrophic. Nearly 90% of the photos were ruined or lost, and since the crime scene had already been cleaned up, there was no way to recreate or recover them. Vital evidence simply vanished. The investigation became chaotic, especially because 2 different police departments were working the case, one from Kilgore, where the crime occurred, and another from the town where the bodies were found. Instead of cooperating, they clashed. The rivalry grew so severe that at one point, the Texas Rangers withdrew entirely from the case. The location where the bodies were discovered was deeply unsettling. A remote, desolate area filled with dirt, gravel and scattered stones. No houses, no lights, just emptiness. Anyone venturing there at midnight would have to know the terrain well. Investigators concluded that the killer had to be local, or at least someone who had visited the site many times before. They brought in tracking dogs and questioned residents near both the restaurant and the dump site. But nothing came of it. With every lead evaporating, the police were left with no choice but to turn to the public. They offered a massive reward, $50,000 for any tip that could help crack the case. Not long after, a woman came forward. She said she had been at the restaurant on the night of the murders, about 2 hours before closing. She overheard one of the employees telling a coworker that there was $2,000 in the drawer that needed to be deposited in the bank the next morning. But what caught her attention was a man standing nearby, listening closely. She described him as tall, African American, in his mid-20s, about 6 feet tall. This statement opened a new theory. Maybe the crime wasn't premeditated at all. Perhaps the man decided on the spot to rob the restaurant, and when things spiraled out of control, he killed the employees to silence witnesses. But another, darker theory emerged, one tied to drugs. One of the victims, Jim Johnson, had suffered the most gunshot wounds, leading investigators to suspect he might have been involved with drug dealers. Maybe the massacre was an act of revenge, and the other victims were just collateral damage. This led the police to a notorious figure, James Nees, the son of a powerful Texas congressman. He was infamous for dealing drugs and weapons. On the very morning of the murders, he had been arrested for carrying an unlicensed gun, but released on bail hours later. That same night, he borrowed a handgun from a friend, returned it the next morning, right around the time the murders had occurred. What fueled suspicion even further were multiple reports from locals claiming they'd heard James boasting, "If you don't follow my orders, your fate will be the same as the Kentucky Five." The police arrested him immediately. To their shock, they discovered he had an injured finger and a broken nail, the exact kind of evidence found at the crime scene. For a moment, it seemed like the case was solved. But when they compared his nail to the one found on the victim's waistband, there was no match. Even the thickness of the nails was completely different. Once again, the investigation fell apart. No solid evidence, no definitive suspect. The case circled back to square one, and the shadow of the killer still lingered, unknown, unpunished. After suspicion fell on James, and the evidence against him failed, the police kept receiving tips from the public. Among these reports, 2 names stood out: Romy and Daniel, African American cousins, one 25 and the other 22 years old. Both had a long criminal record in Texas, filled with armed robberies and theft. One of the main reasons they became suspects was the striking similarity between their past crimes and what happened at the Kiltaken restaurant. In their last known robbery, they stormed into a small store, threatened the staff with guns, forced them to lie face down on the floor, warning that anyone who moved would be killed, before looting the place and fleeing. When investigators tried to bring them in, they discovered that both had already been arrested that very same day for a different offense. During questioning, they completely denied involvement in the massacre, claiming they had been in another city with a friend at the time. They added that a hurricane had struck that day, forcing them to stay far away from their hometown. With no direct evidence against them, police excluded them from the case. Years passed, and the investigation spiraled into chaos. Every new lead went nowhere, and the case kept returning to square one. Even worse, 20 long years slipped by without any real progress, despite different detectives taking over the file. No modern technology was applied. No fresh tests were conducted, raising suspicion that the police deliberately buried the truth after mishandling most of the evidence early on. But 10 years after the crime, one detective suggested reanalyzing the broken fingernail using modern DNA techniques. The results were shocking. The nail didn't belong to the killer, but to the victim, Mary Taylor. This raised doubts that the police might never have properly compared the samples during the initial investigation. By the early 2000s, the case was reopened and only 2 pieces of evidence remained: the fingernail and a blood-stained handkerchief. Since the nail had lost its value, all hope rested on the handkerchief. When tested, the result was explosive. The blood matched Romy and Daniel, the very cousins who had been dismissed 20 years earlier. Both men were arrested again. They tried to defend themselves by claiming the police were racist, that their confessions had been extracted under the threat of execution, and that the system had once protected them to cover for a politician's son, James Nees. But the jury wasn't convinced. In the end, Daniel received 5 consecutive life sentences. Strangely, investigators remained convinced a third suspect had taken part in the killings, yet Romy and Daniel stubbornly refused to reveal his identity. To this day, his name remains a mystery. And so, even with convictions and the case closed on paper, the story lingers in shadows, haunted by racism, police negligence, and secrets that may never be revealed.